This podcast provides a platform to discuss important questions and complex issues, challenge the status quo, and confront the boundaries of the establishment. I'm Retired Police Chief Daniel Hahn. I went from being arrested at 16 to serving over 34 years in law enforcement. My goal is to keep you informed with news not being reported, voices not being heard, and the untold history of how we got here so that we can create a way forward. My pleasure to introduce our guest on A Way Forward podcast today is Retired Chief Kenton Rainey, who spent 4 decades in public safety. He's been the police chief at places like the University of Chicago, San Francisco BART, City of Fairfield, and a very distinguished career that started in Ventura County Sheriff's Department. He's a recognized expert in leading successful organizational change and police reform efforts through training, stakeholder involvement, and civilian oversight. But that's not all. Retired Chief Rainey has participated in the White House Police Open Data Initiative designed to increase transparency, served on the board of directors of the National Alliance on Mentally Ill, otherwise known as NAMI, and was instrumental in the advocacy and passage of California Senate Bills 11 and 29, which increased training for California Police Academy recruits and for police field training officers on how to respond and deal with the mentally ill. He's also testified before President Obama's 21st Century Policing Task Force on implementation of body-worn cameras. He's a fellow and participates a lot with NOBLE, the National Organization for Black Law Enforcement Executives, and has been a guest lecturer and participated in law enforcement subject matter panels at places like University of Southern California, New York John Jay College, University of California Irvine, Chapman University, Brandeis University, Loyola Marymount, International Association of Police Chiefs, the National Organization for Law Enforcement Executives, NOBLE, Cal Chiefs, and the United States Department of Justice. So welcome, Chief Rainey.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
So I wanted to start with, in this time we're in now, but also historically, law enforcement has been challenged in a lot of positions to hire certain segments of our society, specifically women, African Americans for police officer positions. And now in law enforcement, we're challenged to hire really anybody. The number of people applying, the number of people leaving, applying decreased, leaving increased. So I'm just curious, back just a couple of years ago when you initially became a police officer, why did you become a police officer as we are challenged so often in recruiting African-American people from the African-American community to be police officers? You chose many years ago to be a police officer. Why?
Thank you for that question. I grew up in Chicago on the South Side, just another community organizer like President Obama from the South Side. We grew up right behind a 21st police district for the Chicago PD, and we watched them go back and forth to work. And my 2 best friends, we grew up knowing that we were going to be the police.
Wow.
And so I'm not one of the guys that stumbled into it, saw an ad in the paper, made a decision. I knew since I was probably about 12 years old, this is what I wanted to do. And I was just lucky enough to be able to select this as a career and live out my dream.
Yeah, that is unusual. So, there's been many articles, news programs, talk about Black police chiefs, especially over the last couple of years. The USA Today just published an article where they interviewed several Black police chiefs, including myself, and they talked about things, challenges for a Black police chief, things like pushback from some in the Black community, pushback internally to the police departments, and in some cases, this belief that if we hire a Black police chief, our expectation is that they're going to solve all the problems we have pretty quickly, especially the problems in the Black community. So with that, what do you think there's not an abundance of black police chiefs in our country. Oftentimes, when you hear a black police chief being sworn in, you hear that they were the first. And so, what do you think are the benefits that you, as a black police chief, and other black chiefs bring to a leadership role in an organization that's pretty important, in my opinion, to the community?
Well, if you have a substantial minority community and you grew up in a minority community, you bring authentic, an authentic background that you can connect with the community. You know, my first police chief's job, and pretty much all my jobs, first thing I did, I moved to the community. I go to church in the community. My kids go to school in that community. So I'm going to see people in the grocery store. I'm going to see them in church on Sunday. One thing that resonated with me, I heard somebody speaking one time, said it's one thing to deliver public safety police services. It's another thing to actually sample that policing public safety services, and you're better able to do that when you live in the community. So when you actually live there, and people can access you and you can access them, you bring that connection, especially when it comes to implementing community policing. And for me, it's that organizational philosophy that we have to partner with our stakeholders in order to identify what's important, what's not important, tell them what we can and can't do in order to address the public safety issues, because we can't be all things to all people. We can't solve all problems. We need to know what's our lane, what we can do, and reach out to the other stakeholders who, in government, it could be local government, county government, state government, the federal government, or nonprofits, or even private entities to assist us in addressing problems.
So, along those same lines, and these articles like the USA Today speak to some of these challenges that they are basically saying are unique to African American police chiefs. What do you think are some of the challenges, both that you experience or just any black police chief in today's day and age, some of the unique challenges that a black police chief would face?
Being a police chief is hard.
Yeah,
regardless.
I can attest to that.
Regardless, it's, whether you're black, white, Asian, male, female, whatever. But as a black police chief, and if there's a black community, they expect you to come in and change everything overnight.
And what happens when that doesn't happen?
You're going to hear about it. You're going to really hear about it. So again, it's important for you to get in there and meet people where they are. A lot of chiefs make mistakes where they sit back and they're waiting for people to come to them. People are meeting in communities already. They already have little groups that they form for various reasons. It's incumbent upon you and to get your command staff, your managers, and your supervisors out, find out where those meetings are taking place, and show up and start making those connections. And again, telling them what you can and cannot do, setting expectations. That's probably one of the biggest challenges that I found when in my travels across the country, working in various departments, managing the expectations. Because when they hire you, it's almost like people are thinking you're the second coming, you're a savior, that you're gonna just solve everything right then and there. And it's just, these problems didn't come overnight. They were a long time coming, and they're not going to go away overnight.
Right. So somebody with your experience, you've worked in big environments like Chicago to smaller environments like Fairfield, from higher education to municipal to transportation. So much broader experience than most police chiefs I've known, in terms of, like most police chiefs I know are city police chiefs. So they might work in multiple cities, but they're all cities. You have had a pretty diverse career of leadership. So with that, and also a lot of cities, for example, Sacramento does a community survey every year on basically what is this neighborhood's trust level with the police department. And you can guess just as well as I can which communities have a high level of trust and which communities have a low level of trust. And typically it's the impoverished communities that are often minority communities that have very little trust. So somebody with your experience, what do you think is needed to bridge that gap between the communities that have very little trust in the police department and the police department? So what is needed to bring those levels of trust up similar to the other communities within that same city?
You know, my first department, the Ventura County Sheriff's Department, when I was put in charge of our headquarters station, and we had a minority community, it was predominantly Hispanic. And when I went out with the outgoing captain to meet the various community groups, and he introduced me, and people were arms folded, just giving you the looks like oh, you're not gonna do anything. You're no different than everybody else. So after he introduced me, told him who I was, my background, ready to work with them. We're gonna change things. We're gonna make the community better, safer. We're gonna do a lot of things. Second meeting, same thing. Third meeting, same thing. So a lady pulled me aside and said, the reason no one's talking to you is because one of the people that is up on the dais with you manages and owns a lot of properties that rent to drug dealers and gang members. And this person was a contributor to the sheriff's campaign, because I work with the sheriff's department. And you wouldn't know that.
Right.
You wouldn't know that. And so in order to try to, again, we got to bring everybody together. I can't take this guy's property. So what we did was we found a program through the federal government on how he could become a better landlord. And more money for him, more money through taxes, do all the good things that we want. And it was a win-win situation. The number one thing, again, you have to get out there and listen. You have to listen and then set expectations as far as what you can and can't do. I can't arrest this guy because he's making a bad decision on who he rents to. I can't, unless he's knowingly involved in drug dealing, gang activity, et cetera, et cetera. But, we can do things in order to make it better. We did a run. One of the things about police departments, we're data rich.
Yep.
We collect a lot of data. We did a run on just that guy's property. Over like 3 years, there were probably like 1,200 calls for service up to his property. So the people
right,
they know what's going on.
Absolutely.
And so when you're walking around with that person, and he's not a bad person. It's not a bad person. He's trying to make money. So whoever he can get into the property, that's who he's going to get into. And it becomes a vicious cycle, because once it starts spiraling out of control, only certain people are going to rent.
Yep.
Yeah. So we work with him, got him into the Weed and Seed program and some landlord training, and turned a lot of that stuff around.
So even on that same topic, but outside of law enforcement, these same communities that have been impoverished for decades, and the children grow up in a lot of traumatic things happening in their neighborhood that they witness, that they see, and just a lot of challenges that other neighborhoods don't have. What do you think we as a society and leaders have to do, or should be talking about, or doing, thinking about, to change the dynamics in some of these neighborhoods that have been this way? I know Chicago has neighborhoods like that, right? Like 2 decades ago, they were pretty similar, right? And so what do we need to be thinking about that will change these neighborhoods and create environments that are more conducive to success?
A number of things. I grew up in one of those communities. I grew up in the projects on the south side of Chicago, and as I said, one of the police districts was behind us. Kids can become what they see.
Hmm.
They can dream. Access leads to exposure. Exposure leads to opportunity. If we want to really, really deal with some of our public safety issues, we need to approach it the same way the medical communities approach their craft, their work. You take the public health approach. And we've shown that it's successful when it comes to drunk driving, seatbelts, and stuff like that. You start with a massive education program, like how they are trying to address cancer. If we try to address crime the same way, a massive education program, along with the prevention intervention efforts, and we use the police as the last resort, we invest more up front, you get a better return on your investment. For example, one of the things that I've done at a number of places that I work that I'm very, very proud of that are the police athletics leagues, activities league. Yeah, I still have one in Fairfield from when I first went there. And one of the guys that came up to me, I was already thinking about doing it. One of the guys that came up to me, he's now the police chief in Fairfield, Dan Marshall. I mean, just a great story.
He
He
came up in the PAL?
he came up as a police when I came as a new
Oh.
police chief. Fairfield, he came up to me, knew my background because I was involved in PILE at other places at the Ventura County Sheriff's Department, and said that he really wanted to get a PILE program going, and I gave him some information. He ran with it. I lobbied the city council, and we put that program in place. If one kid, if you think about it, one kid comes all the way up through your PAL program, becomes a productive citizen, and joins law enforcement, it's huge.
Yeah.
It's huge. I remember when I was coaching like seventh, eighth grade basketball, Ventura County Sheriff, and you fast forward several years later, I'm in the hallway, and I see this big kid walking in the hall, adult deputy walking in the hallway. I didn't even recognize him. He said, "Hey, coach." Look, like, wow. But then you look and you notice the face that, wow. So we talked, and he talked about everything that we talked about. And again, back to kids can become what they see. And so if we have these PAL programs and we use that public health approach towards public safety, where education, intervention, and the last thing you do is the radiation or have surgery, and that's the police where we're actually enforcing, taking people, arresting people. You spend this money up front. We pay more to incarcerate somebody than to send them to school. When you look at how much it costs a whole an adult in a prison setting or a jail setting, yeah, yeah. The number one predictor for crime is poverty. Best way out of poverty is education.
It's so interesting you said that about the big, tall deputy walking down the hallway because I was helping facilitate a course in Baton Rouge not too long ago, and we had the students who were all police officers and deputies from that area do an exercise where they wrote why they became a police officer, and then they reported out after the break. And I remember this one deputy. He wasn't brand new deputy. Matter of fact, he might have been a sergeant or a lieutenant. And he wrote that he had a police officer in a PAL. I don't know if it was specifically PAL, but a PAL like program that coached him and mentored him. And he was the reason why he became a police officer. Well, it was pretty cool. And folks started crying because the guy he was talking about, he didn't know this, was sitting right in front of him, but it was during COVID, so he had a mask on, so he didn't recognize him. He was going through the training too. And so it was pretty cool to see, and you start seeing those stories over and over. One person changed somebody's trajectory. You mentioned that police departments should be the last resort. And recently I spoke with retired Chief Renee Hall from Dallas. And she said something similar. I think it's interesting coming from a police chief that you just said the police department should be the last resort, because one of the things I see from leaders, whether they're political leaders, community leaders, that often talk about reimagining police department, but when something happens, some big thing happens, crime goes up, violent crime, they seem to always call the police department to be the sole solution in these communities that we're talking about, no matter what the issue is. And you just said they should be the last resort. So explain how a police chief just said that the police department should be the last resort. It sounds to me like you're more interested in long-term problem solving and solutions than just a temporary go in and arrest everybody.
And we have to be about long-term, playing long ball. If we really want to be successful, we cannot do what's politically expedient. If you had this big call for defunding the police, and whether you're for or against, it doesn't matter to me. I worked in a number of police departments. Number one, we have never been able to stay at full staffing. You're not. At the end of the year, you have these vacancies, and you have money left over that's taken, and something else is done with it. One of the things that I've done, and especially at BART, we have a huge, when I was there, a huge problem with people suffering from mental illness within the system, because they're trying to get shelter from the weather, be it too hot, too cold. So I was able to convince the board to let me use money from vacant positions to hire a mental health clinician to actually troubleshoot the system proactively, contacting people before they go into crisis, because those are the ones that we are going to end up on the 6 o'clock news using excessive force, or possibly in some type of officer-involved shooting, because they are armed, because they're trying to protect themselves against other people in the system. And once they go into a mental health crisis, they're hearing voices or whatever, because they're off their medication and they're trying to treat themselves through alcohol or some other type of drugs because they don't have access to the medication. I was able to successfully do that with vacant money. And when you look at the drain on our resources that a small number of individuals have for repeated calls for service, repeated calls for service. Now, BART has an entire department, with division within the police department of individuals who do that.
So, as somebody that I know is very active in NOBLE, the National Organization for Black Law Enforcement Executives, and mentors people in law enforcement, and somebody that has been the police chief in multiple agencies, what advice would you give to somebody that is either new or thinking about joining law enforcement in today's time?
Well, I think it's a great career. It was a great career for me. And like my two best friends, they both were in law enforcement, successful law enforcement in other parts of the country, and we still talk every day. If it's worth looking into, especially if you want to do something that is noble, something that is going to give back to not just your community, but your city, your county, your state, the country. When you talk about constitutional policing, the things that were deprived of us because we were the only immigrants forced into this country. Most people come here looking for the American dream, and it was a nightmare for Black Americans, for our ancestors, and constitutional rights were denied us. And now that we have them, we bring a unique perspective, and we should really, really cherish and safeguard constitutional rights of individuals. Um, I would suggest talk to mentors. I would suggest, all of these organizations, whether it's a female organization, black organization, Hispanic, Asian, they have student members. You can join those organizations as students and go to some of their local conferences or even the national conferences. They have scholarships and vice versa. I would suggest that law enforcement leaders, if you're really interested in diversifying your ranks, and it needs to be more than diversifying your ranks, because my first agency, I was part of a class action lawsuit 10 years later after we were hired because they hired us, but we weren't included.
Mm.
And that's the important piece
And
of
when you say included, what do you mean?
You couldn't get a job. You couldn't get a specialized assignment.
So you were patrol.
Patrol. You could patrol. And you're gonna, Peter, you're gonna hit that ceiling because you don't have the diverse background of investigations, narcotics, vice.
So that even harms your promotion ability.
It's gonna it's gonna be difficult for you to compete as you go up the ladder. So I would suggest that they, be it students, read about these organizations, find how they can get involved. Like our local chapter in San Francisco, Bay Area of Noble, we're getting ready to do a scholarship fundraiser where we give scholarships not just to only high school students, but to continuing college students as well. And the same thing for police chiefs. If they're looking for recruits, we need to really, really rethink what we're doing and follow the private sector model, how they get interns and they bring them in the summertime and send them back to school, and then you keep that connection, because once you get people on board, people leave, but the majority of your people stay. Right. Yeah, the majority of people stay.
So, last question.
Okay.
What are you doing now? Are you retired and enjoying the good life, or are you doing speaking or consulting, or what keeps you busy these days?
Well, I'm retired.
Some people don't know how to retire.
I'm not that person. I'm not that person. I'm retired. However, I will not say I'll never work again.
Right.
I do a lot of mentoring with individuals across the country that I speak to about various things. People who are interested in becoming a police chief. I also give people current police chiefs my perspective, who are going through things at their own department, and I'm paying it back going forward, because this is what was taught to me. I could pick up the phone when something was happening, and talk to people and say, hey, this is what I got. What do you think? And I could get multiple perspectives. One of the things I'm starting to get involved in is oversight, where I think was really coming to American
oversight of law enforcement.
Oversight in law enforcement, and law enforcement the leaders need to start embracing it. If you don't have it, it's coming. It's coming. And if you're not auditing what you're doing, we have that adage, you get what you inspect. Mm-hmm. And if you're not inspecting it, you're going to see it on the 6 o'clock news one day. Everybody thinks it can't be me. When I was at BART, we were the first agency in the nation that went full body cameras. A lot of people don't know that.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, we were first in the nation that embraced that technology and required all our patrol officers, patrol personnel, when you're out there, you need
now it's pretty common.
It's pretty common, but it was a major pushback getting that through.
So if somebody was interested in possibly being mentored by you or wanted some assistance with oversight or audits, would they go through the Bay Area Noble, or how would they get a hold of you if they wanted to talk to you about those sort of things?
If somebody wanted to talk to me, they could get a hold of me. My phone number, 805-236-5013.
Oh, you done did it now.
Yeah. I generally don't answer numbers that I don't know.
Right.
But if you text me or leave a voice message, I'll listen to it. And I will call you back. And if I can assist or point you in a particular direction, I will.
All right. Well, hey, it's been a pleasure, and I'm so thankful you came on. And I think your insight and knowledge will be helpful for many people. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate you. Appreciate what you're doing.
One of the big purposes of A Way Forward is to hear different voices and different opinions, because that is how we can make informed decisions ourselves. So if you are someone that would like to come on A Way Forward to express your opinion, go to chiefhahn.com/podcast. Chief, HAHN.com/podcast.